What if I told you that everything you believe about yourself isn't really you? Your name, your job, your story, even the voice in your head, all belong to something else. Something that's been running the show your entire life, your ego. The ego is clever. It wears a mask that looks exactly like you. It whispers, "I am you." It feeds on your achievements, your fears, your memories, your pain. It convinces you that without it, you'd be nothing. And for most people, that's where the story ends, a lifetime spent trying to protect a mask. But then, one day, something happens. You start to notice the cracks. Maybe it's a moment of silence that feels too peaceful to explain. Maybe it's a loss that shatters everything you thought mattered. Maybe you just wake up one morning and feel tired of pretending, tired of fighting, tired of playing roles. And in that quiet space, the illusion starts to break. That's when the mirror begins to crack. You see that all the things you thought defined you, the successes, the failures, the opinions, were never truly you. They were reflections of what your ego needed to survive. It needed to feel important, to be seen, to win, to control. But the real you, the silent observer behind the thoughts, never needed any of that. When you stop living from the ego, the world around you doesn't instantly change, but your perception does. You stop reacting to every slight, every insult, every little threat to your image. You begin to feel a strange kind of freedom, the kind that doesn't come from success or approval, but from letting go. The things that used to hurt you no longer have power. The people who once triggered you now seem like mirrors reflecting your own unhealed parts. And slowly, the false identity starts to fade. It feels unsettling at first, almost like dying. Because the ego does die. It fights back, whispers in panic, tries to pull you back into old patterns. But if you stay aware, if you keep watching instead of reacting, something profound emerges. A peace so deep that words can't reach it. A sense of being that doesn't need to prove, achieve, or defend anything. You begin to realize, you were never the mask. You were the awareness watching the mask all along. So, what really happens when you stop living from the ego? That's where the real journey begins, the moment the mirror finally breaks. When you stop living from the ego, life begins to look unfamiliar. It's like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were in. For years, you moved through the world trying to build something, an identity, a legacy, a name people would remember. You fought for success, for validation, for the feeling of being enough. But one day, the striving ends. Not because you give up, but because you finally see there's nothing to win. The ego lives on comparison. It thrives on better and worse, right and wrong, me and them. It needs a story, one that keeps you running towards something or away from something else. When you awaken, you start seeing through that story. You realize most of your decisions weren't really choices, they were reactions, programmed responses to protect an image that never truly existed. The first thing that happens is detachment. You stop identifying with your thoughts. You start watching them instead. The voice that used to sound like you, the one that said, "I'm not good enough," or "I need to be more successful," or "they don't respect me," begins to lose its power. You no longer fight it. You simply observe. And that small shift changes everything. Then comes peace, but not the kind you find in silence or meditation alone. It's the peace that comes from no longer needing control. The peace that comes when you stop forcing life to obey your expectations. You stop chasing, and life starts unfolding naturally, almost like it's breathing you instead of you breathing it. And something else happens, something subtle yet powerful. You begin to see others differently. Where you once saw enemies or competition, you now see reflections of your own mind. Someone's anger doesn't trigger you, you see their pain. Someone's success doesn't make you jealous, you feel inspired. Even strangers start to feel familiar, as if you're looking into pieces of yourself scattered across humanity. That's when compassion blooms. Not the kind that tries to fix or save people, but the kind that simply understands. You see the game everyone's playing, chasing money, validation, love, approval, and you no longer judge them for it. Because you played it too. And in that understanding, judgment dissolves. But you realize you're not your job. Not your past. Not your successes or failures. You are the awareness watching it all come and go. And when that realization lands, everything slows down. Time feels softer. Moments feel fuller. You stop living through the mind and start living through presence. The smallest things, sunlight through a window, a quiet morning, the sound of your own breath, become sacred. You no longer seek meaning. You feel it. And that's the truth most people never discover, that peace was never missing. It was buried beneath the noise of the ego, waiting for you to stop identifying with it. So what happens next? When the ego fades, what takes its place? That's where the real transformation begins, and it's far more mysterious than you think. When the ego finally begins to dissolve, there's a strange kind of silence that fills your world. It's not the silence of an empty room. It's the silence of you returning to yourself. For the first time, you realize you've been listening to noise your entire life, noise made of thoughts, opinions, and endless internal debates. The ego was like a radio that never turned off, broadcasting stories about who you were and what you needed to do next. And now, that radio grows quiet. At first, it feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Without the constant chatter, you might wonder, who am I without that voice? For years, you were the achiever, the planner, the protector, the one who had to be somebody. Now, all those roles fall away. You stand in stillness, and for the first time, there's no script to follow. No identity to defend. Just awareness, open, silent, infinite. The space between thoughts. As the mind slows down, you begin to notice something subtle, a quiet gap between thoughts. It's so small at first you almost miss it. But the more you pay attention, the wider it gets. That space is pure awareness, untouched, unbroken, and perfectly still. It doesn't judge. It doesn't chase. It doesn't react. It simply is. This is where your true self lives. The you that existed before the ego built its walls. At this stage, this is the beginning of living consciously. The end of control. When the ego fades, so does the illusion of control. For most of your life, you believed you were steering the wheel, that every success, every failure, every plan was yours to manage. But as awareness deepens, you begin to notice something. Life doesn't need your control to function perfectly. The sun rises without you asking. Your heart beats without your effort. The seasons turn without your approval. You start to see that existence has always been flowing naturally. It was only the ego that believed it had to interfere. At first, letting go of control feels like falling. You might resist, thinking, if I stop planning, everything will fall apart. But when you finally release, when you trust the flow of life, something remarkable happens. Things begin to align effortlessly. You meet the right people at the right time. Opportunities arise without forcing them. Even challenges seem to carry hidden lessons, almost as if life itself is guiding you. This is surrender, not in weakness, but in wisdom. It's realizing that the river of life has always known where relationships without the mask. When you no longer live from ego, your relationships begin to transform. You stop approaching others from a place of need. You don't look for validation, attention, or control. Instead, you begin to see people, not as roles, not as characters, but as souls on their own path of awakening. Conversations shift from performance to presence. Silence no longer feels awkward. Love stops being a transaction and becomes recognition, the recognition of the same consciousness living in another form. You no longer need people to complete you. You simply appreciate them for who they are, as they are. This kind of connection feels different, softer, quieter, yet infinitely deeper. It's not built on words, but on energy. You sense when someone is hurting without them saying it. You feel joy when they smile, peace when they're near. And when people leave, you no longer fall apart. Because you know that love doesn't disappear with distance, it changes form, but remains alive within you. This is one of the clearest signs of awakening, the end of attachment and the birth of understanding. Freedom from fear. Ego and fear are twins. The ego fears failure, rejection, loss, and death, because it believes those things are the end of you. But when you awaken, you begin to see that fear was only protecting an illusion. You realize you can lose your job, your money, even your reputation, and still be okay. Because those things were never the source of who you are. They were temporary clothes the ego wore for a while. You also stop fearing change. You see that everything in life moves in cycles, beginnings, endings, rebirth. What the ego calls loss, awareness calls transformation. And perhaps most profound of all, you stop fearing death. Because you sense, deep within, that what you truly are can never die. Bodies change. Stories end. But awareness, the quiet witness of it all, remains untouched. This realization doesn't make you detached, it makes you alive. When you stop fearing the end, you begin to live fully in the now. You no longer postpone joy. You no longer wait for permission to rest, to love, to simply be. You understand that every breath is a miracle, every moment is sacred, and every heartbeat is proof that you're already enough. The return of intuition. As ego fades, intuition awakens. For years, the ego's noise drowned out your inner voice, the soft whisper that always knew the way. But now, in the quiet space of awareness, that voice grows clearer. It doesn't shout. It guides. It speaks through feelings, synchronicities, and gentle knowing. You start making choices not from logic or fear, but from alignment. You might notice that when you follow this inner guidance, life unfolds more smoothly. Doors open naturally. Paths reveal themselves without struggle. This is not magic, it's clarity. When the mind stops fighting, you can finally hear what your higher self has been saying all along. Purpose without pressure. Before awakening, purpose often felt like a heavy burden, something to find, prove, or achieve. The ego turned it into a mission. I must do something great. I must make my mark. But when you awaken, purpose stops being something you chase and becomes something you live. You realize your purpose isn't a single goal or career. It's the energy you bring to everything you do. Washing dishes, talking to a stranger, walking in nature, everything becomes sacred when done with awareness. You discover that meaning isn't in the task, but in the presence behind it. This shift changes everything. You no longer measure success by results, but by alignment. You don't need recognition, because fulfillment now comes. The illusion of separation. Perhaps the most profound change of all is this: you begin to feel one with everything. The boundaries that once defined you and them start to blur. You realize that everything, the trees, the sky, the people, the challenges, are all expressions of the same consciousness playing different roles. This isn't a thought you repeat, it's a truth you feel. You sense the connection in your bones, in your breath, in your stillness. And once you feel it, you can never unsee it. You understand that hurting others is hurting yourself. That giving is receiving. That love isn't something to find, it's what you are. And from that place, gratitude becomes your natural language. You stop asking, why me, and start whispering, thank you. Even for the pain. Even for the lessons. Because now you see, everything was guiding you here, to this moment of clarity, peace, and unity. The subtle return of the ego. Even after awakening, the ego doesn't disappear forever. It returns in whispers, in habits, in moments of stress or fear. But now, you see it differently. You don't fight it, you watch it. You notice when it tries to take control, when it craves approval, fears rejection, or compares itself to others. And instead of reacting, you smile. Because now you know, it's just a program. A leftover echo from an old identity. You don't need to destroy it. You just need to stay aware of it. Awareness is enough. Because the moment you see the ego, you are no longer lost in it. This is the dance of awakening, the gentle balance between being human and being infinite. The new way of living. When you stop living from the ego, life becomes breathtakingly simple. You stop running from what is and start embracing it. You no longer search for happiness, you become it. There's no grand announcement. No fireworks. Just an ordinary moment that feels extraordinary because you're finally awake enough to notice it. You laugh more easily. You forgive faster. You rest deeper. You speak slower. You listen better. You realize that this moment right here, is all there ever was. And that's enough. The quiet truth. At the end of this journey, something becomes beautifully clear. You were never meant to escape the world. You were meant to see it, without filters, without fear, without the mask of ego. The world was never your prison. Your mind was. And now that the walls have fallen, you can finally breathe again. But here's the question few people dare to ask. If you're not the ego, if you're not the story, if you're not the voice in your head, then what are you, really? That's the mystery that awaits beyond awakening. The truth that words can't describe, but your heart already knows. When you finally stop living from the ego, something extraordinary happens, but not in the way you might expect. There's no explosion of light, no dramatic revelation. It's quieter than that. It's the kind of silence that hums through everything, the kind that makes even ordinary moments feel sacred. You wake up in the morning, and the first thing you notice isn't the weight of your thoughts, it's the space between them. That space is freedom. It's peace wearing no label, love without an opposite, awareness without effort. You begin to realize that awakening was never about becoming more, it was about becoming less attached, less reactive, less afraid. And in losing everything false, you discover everything real. The disappearing self. As the ego fades, the idea of me starts to dissolve. You look at your reflection and see someone familiar, but no longer feel trapped inside their story. You know their history, their scars, their triumphs, yet none of it defines you anymore. You see the body move, the hands reach, the mouth speak, but it's as if something larger is doing it all through you. You realize that life is living itself through you. Every breath, every word, every step, guided by something far beyond the mind's control. It's like being the sky and the return of presence. When you stop living from the ego, you start living in presence. Presence is what's left when the past and future lose their grip. It's not something you create, it's what's always been here, patiently waiting behind the noise. You start noticing things you never saw before. The way sunlight dances on a wall. The quiet rhythm of your breath. The softness of stillness itself. You realize that peace was never far away, it was only covered by layers of thought. Every desire, every fear, every plan was like fog hiding the truth of the moment. Now that the fog has lifted, you see how radiant the present really is. And in that awareness, a gentle understanding unfolds. You never needed to become someone. You only needed to remember what you already are. The paradox of awakening. Many people imagine that awakening means you stop feeling human emotions, no more anger, sadness, or fear. But the truth is different. You still feel, but you no longer become the feelings. Sadness might visit, but it doesn't define you. Anger might rise, but it doesn't control you. The ripple effect. Once you awaken, the way you move through the world changes, not through effort, but through energy. People sense something different about you. They can't explain it, but they feel calmer in your presence. Your peace begins to ripple outward. You stop trying to convince others of anything. You simply live the truth, and that silent example speaks louder than words. Because awakening isn't something to preach, it's something to embody. And maybe, somewhere out there, someone sees your calm, your clarity, your quiet joy. And they start to question their own noise. That's how the chain of awakening spreads, not through noise, but through presence. So, if this message has awakened something inside you, even a small spark, don't keep it hidden. Let it ripple outward. Share it. Pass it along. Because you never know who might hear it and remember themselves through it. And as that awareness spreads, the collective ego, the illusion of separation, begins to fade. The world doesn't change overnight, but consciousness does. And that shift, once begun, cannot be undone. The ultimate surrender. At the deepest level of awakening, something profound happens. You stop searching altogether. The cliffhanger of consciousness. But here's where the story doesn't end, because awakening isn't a destination. It's a doorway. You've stepped beyond the ego, but now you stand at the edge of something even greater, pure consciousness. This is where language fails, where silence begins to speak louder than any thought. In this place, questions fade, but one remains, soft, echoing, eternal. If I am not this body, not this mind, not this story, then what am I? And who is it that's asking? That question doesn't seek an answer. It seeks to pull you home, back into the stillness where all answers dissolve into one infinite awareness. So pause for a moment. Listen. Can you hear it? The silence that's been here all along, behind the thoughts, behind the heartbeat, behind the world. That silence is you. That stillness is who you've been searching for. Everything else, the ego, the story, the mask, was only ever an echo. And now that echo has faded, leaving behind what was always here. The simple, eternal truth of being. The living invitation. Before this moment ends, let the awareness settle deeper. Feel it in your breath. Feel it in your stillness. This, right now, is what freedom feels like. And as you carry this awareness into the rest of your day, remember this. Every thought, every interaction, every challenge is another chance to stay awake. To live, not from the ego's fear, but from the heart's knowing. The journey doesn't stop here, it unfolds with every conscious moment you allow. And if this message touched something inside you, let that spark move outward. Not because you should. Not because of an algorithm. But because awareness, once awakened, wants to awaken others. So, share this light. Send it where it's needed. Comment your reflections below. Let your story remind others that awakening isn't rare, it's waiting in all of us. And when you feel ready, come back, there's more to explore beyond the ego, deeper truths that can't be spoken, only felt. We'll journey there, together. Because this story, your story, isn't over. It's only just beginning. What happens after awakening, when awareness begins to create reality itself? That's the next chapter, and it's far more extraordinary than you can imagine.